agenda item we have is the strategic framework, planning, work update, and innovation.
All right. Thank you, Mary. I'm going to ask Andrew to join me for tonight's discussion. This is our last update on how the strategic framework planning process has gone before we have our big end-of-year retreat with the board in June. So we don't plan on taking up a ton of your time tonight, but we do want to make sure you're apprised of how things are going. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. We are going to give you a little update on the last and final meeting of the strategic framework planning group. And then we're going to spend the second chunk of our discussion talking about our ways of working, which include our ways of working as it relates to innovation, which is something we're very interested in doing more of in the next 5 years. As a reminder, this is the process we've been going through all year. Our last update to the board was on April 23rd, and here we are, June 4th, and as I mentioned, later this month we'll be having our final retreat with the board, and if all goes well, we'll be ready with the new framework starting in August. The board has already done a big chunk of its work. You have approved your vision, a new set of core value statements and goals, and the highest level metrics. I should remind the board that since you approved those, I have had the wonderful opportunity to present the vision, core values, and goals that you approved at a couple of big meetings, including the Circle of Friends meeting that just happened, the big luncheon last week, and I thought they were extraordinarily well received. Applause. I think they're a powerful set of statements about the future of our district. The work that we've been doing in the second half of the year, as you know, is very much focused on strategy. What will we do? What will we enact in order to meet the goals in alignment with our core values and vision? So the Strategic Framework Planning Group, here are some cute pictures of the team, about 80 or so people, mainly educators, along with some wonderful students and parents who joined us this year. James was able to be a part of that process, as well as Kate Taves. The group met again to wrap up its work in May, and took one last look at the strategy that's coming together. They pressure tested it for its alignment to the board's vision, core values, goals. They took a really close look at how to streamline the priorities, which weren't yet streamlined. So they really helped us kind of rank order those, and worked a lot on alignment and coherence across the work that we're scoping for the next phase. Here's an example of the feedback that the planning team gave us in that final round. I think for the most part that team feels like it's the next logical step, right? It's a natural evolution of our work. Makes sense that it's building on where we've been, and the right place to be going. The team, before we finalize the framework, is eager for us to define some of the big terms that are used in the framework, specifically terms like anti-racism, innovation, which we'll talk about tonight, autonomy. Everyone loves those core value statements, but wants to work on making those values live and breathe in our district, and what it will take to build some more competency around them. Even though we did some work on streamlining priorities, the group thinks that we still need to even more streamline the priorities. It's so hard to do. And a very tangible thing that I'll demonstrate a little bit later in our presentation. Everyone wants community schools to be a big part of the next framework, but we decided that it's really more about planning for the future and planning not just within MMSD but across entities in our community. So they wanted it to move to a different section of the framework. So that was the high level feedback. Let me just demonstrate the way our thinking has changed since the last time we met. There aren't many changes, but there are a few subtle ones. Our first major shift is all about empowerment of school communities. The planning team has not asked that we make much of a change to the way this area of the framework is shaping up, but they did do some work to help us think about what might be the first steps to implement next year. We talked a lot about what would it look like out of the gate in 1819 to grant more autonomy in schools, especially as it relates to their professional development and the use of their professional development time. We talked about what would it look like to prototype and pilot an instructional design process in a small number of schools just to get the kinks out so that we're ready for the year after 1920 to bring that process to scale. In the second shift, there's a lot of commitment to this particular area of the framework. I think everyone is really excited about what it will look like for us to embrace culturally responsive practice district-wide and an anti-racist stance as a school district. We mainly, again, talked about what ought to be the first steps that signal change right out of the gate in 1819. Everyone has a book in front of you called Collective Efficacy. The team really wants to district-wide learn together about how to further empower and cultivate a sense of collective efficacy among teams, and specifically teacher teams, right, which is all about teacher leadership in schools. So I just want you to be aware that that is the book that we're going to be using to guide our work in the year ahead. And we talked a little bit about getting into even more school-based work with the National Equity Project. When it comes to the central office priorities, these are the things, the smaller set of projects that only central office can really take on. We worked a lot on streamlining them. So you'll remember in our last iteration there were maybe 5 or 6 projects listed under the 3 priority areas. We have actually gotten it down to about 3. So we're still, I know, I'm impressed with ourselves. We're still working on it. A lot of this will look familiar to you. For priority 1, which is all about deeper learning experiences, we're still focused on early literacy. We're still focused on intervention. We're still focused on culturally relevant curriculum. The difference you'll see here is we've added something about math. I think the feedback that we've gotten, especially from the Strategic Framework Planning Group, is that we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that mathematics is rich and robust across the grade levels. And so we want to hold on to that. And we had before had a standalone bullet about assessment, and we've actually blended that with our work on curriculum. We think if we're updating the curriculum, that will be kind of a natural place to also update the assessment system accordingly. The second priority area, we've really zoomed in on these 3 essential pieces, all pointed towards building stronger, positive, trusting relationships, and better cultures and climates in our schools, youth voice, family partnership, and our work on restorative practices. The third priority area is all focused on really secondary, more personalized experiences that lead to post-secondary success. We've gotten these down to just a few meaty projects. The middle school smaller learning communities work, which we talked about last time. The student center options, we want to deepen and expand for opportunity youth, and our work around personalized pathways at the high school level. So some streamlining, not done, but we're working on it. On Shift 4, which is all about planning for the future, I think the major change here is that we included community schools. And I explained earlier that the reason for doing that is because community schools can't become real unless we're planning far out, 5-10 years in the future and across our community, so beyond MMSD. And then last but not least, originally the framework, this 5th shift, was about risk-taking. And the Strategic Framework Planning Group really thought that it should be more specifically pointed towards innovation, that there is a a set of skills, a process here that we want to learn. It's not just about taking risk. It's about having a skill set that enables you to take risk in smarter ways that produce more positive results and help you solve challenges that have been difficult to solve in the past. So that's pretty much where we are at this point, knowing that the framework is still very much in formation. We've got a few more weeks before our retreat at the end of June, which is the place where we're going to go through it one more time in detail with the board. So let me pause there and just ask if there are any reactions on kind of the status update on the framework before we specifically take up this idea of innovation. Yeah.
TJ. Slide 13, and then actually it kind of comes back when we talk about innovation also. Slide 13.
I don't know which one that is.
Slide 13 is positive trusting relationships that foster thriving cultures and climates.
Got it.
Here, and again, I said it also comes back with the innovation area. We have voice here, we have partnership, we have advocacy. I'd really like to see explicit things around shared decision-making and decision-making processes and structures. And I think that, because I'm not quite sure what the rest of this means without decision-making as being part of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think we've been talking a lot about that on the planning group as well. I think the reason you don't see it here, TJ, is because we're imagining that all this work around empowering school communities is where shared decision-making happens. So it's mainly just kind of where it shows up in the framework. It's a big part of the conversation that's happening. I think as we refine what the school improvement planning process looks like, what the instructional design process looks like, that has to involve and attend to shared decision making. So I definitely get that.
You know, whether here or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Someplace. I mean, I think that because voices can just be, you know, screaming in the wilderness or up against brick walls and all that. And there can be senior partners and junior partners, and I mean all those words that until you get to actual shared decision making and creating structures and cultures around that.
Yeah.
And I guess the restorative approach in some ways goes towards that. I also think I think we have to be careful around within the restorative justice community. Restorative approach has a very specific meaning, a very broad meaning.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful about our commitment there. You know, restorative justice is about learning and behavior. Restorative approach is a broader cultural change.
It is.
And I think that I think we have to be really careful around that. And I'm not sure what we're promising with that. So. Just, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure what we're promising. So.
Okay. Okay.
TJ actually beat me to it because I wanted some more specificity on restorative justice and details. As for his other point, the attorney in me says if it isn't in writing, it's hard for me to think it exists.
Yeah.
It's just the attorney in me is like, where's the copy? Where's it writing? Where? An oral contract isn't worth what it's written on. It's not that I don't trust the people.
Oh, I know.
It's just what I'm trained to do.
I totally get that, Nikki. Just keep in mind, this is just the high-level PowerPoint. At the retreat, you'll see the pages, all the words.
Great.
And that's where
that'll be wonderful.
Yep, you got it. Anything else? Yeah. Kate?
So three comments, maybe starting from the planning for the future.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the first steps, the signal change piece.
Yeah.
It feels challenging with the long-term vision one to be talking about things that are sort of like now.
Yeah.
So maybe when we see the full plan or framework, we can have a little bit more longer term bullets there. So and maybe a couple that come to mind. One of them, and I know that these are related to some of the plans we'll be updating, but one of them is around DLI probably. There's just some bigger structural pieces in the district that I'd love to have on the list. Maybe we don't fully go in depth, but they're related to facilities too. So sorry, my head's kind of spinning. I just landed.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so that was one, just the planning for the future. The second, so the streamlined priorities pieces, priority 1 and 2 align almost perfectly with our goals. Priority 3 doesn't. Our third goal is around creating a district where African American youth thrive. Something to that effect.
Yep.
And so part of me wants to be a little bit more explicit about that in our central office priorities. The word race isn't written on the page anywhere, even though we're talking about being an anti-racist district. So I just was curious what your thinking was there.
Yeah, let me comment on that. Kate knows that I have done the mapping between our goals and these, and that will be included in the framework itself, and we'll talk about that at the retreat. So I'm not as worried about it lining up exactly like that on this page, because I think there are, we've talked about targeted universalism with this group. I mean, there are strategies that are very targeted towards a particular group of students, like African American students, and there are some that will also benefit everyone. I think that it's interesting. I think Nichelle and I talked about this a little bit earlier today. We'd like to, we think that when it comes to the African American achievement goal, the goal for African American excellence, that we want to make sure that everything that's in the framework will serve that goal well, and we want to show where that alignment is. And we think for that goal to be achieved in a sustainable way, that we can't do it without the African American community. So we've been actually doing quite a bit of research of the small number of districts actually that have an explicit strategy or goal related to African American youth, and how their strategy has sort of formulated over time. And I mean, one of the things that we've learned is that they have, in every instance where it's gone well and ultimately been impactful, it's been with a powerful coalition of African Americans helping to inform and guide, and to TJ's earlier point, actually make decisions about the strategy. So I think this is a bigger discussion about how we partner and engage with the African American community over time, as opposed to sort of a, and this, I know this is not what you were suggesting, Kate, but not just a kind of technical alignment of what internal strategies with that goal. So I want to think about that more, because I do want to find time, and it might be that the retreat will be a good initial time for us to talk about what that engagement needs to look like over the life of the framework. Because I don't think it's something that we figure out in advance, right? If it's really about power sharing, we're figuring that out with the community that we serve. Yeah.
I hear that. I do, you know, we made the goal explicitly so that we could also have the actions be explicit. So it's just a good thing to keep pushing on to make sure that it is explicit on the page. The last comment was just around the people investment piece. Again, this may be in the longer framework, but would love to see something around our commitment to growing our own kind of just that. Yeah, you get it. So
yeah, I totally get it. And again, I think it's in the longer
I'm not
materials.
referring to an explicit program there, but rather just a commitment to our own people to invest in bringing them back.
Yeah, like talent development, talent pipeline. That's perfect. Thank you, Kate. Gloria?
So I know safety is one of our, something we're going to be working on as years to come. But I'm just wondering if there's a way in which we can put that at a higher level, sort of, right? Promoting safe schools, right? So that we are really identifying that as one of our priorities. I mean, right, as years to come. I don't see it on here anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we could include it in We Empower School Communities.
Yeah.
Have you talked about that
You
at
know,
all?
it hasn't come up a lot, at least not in the context of the framework. I mean, certainly we've been talking a ton about
Right.
safety.
I don't,
on
that
yeah.
on those 6 summary points, it's on the page.
No, it's it's in the metrics.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Kate?
In what we heard from
Oh.
people in the one pager that we have with those 6 areas,
Yeah.
one of them is safe.
The last one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's more.
That's just what we heard from the community that people wanted.
Yeah, that's right. And that was very much focused on like mental health resources. Yeah, I've read it at least a gazillion times. So,
I mean, I would like to
yeah.
see it,
Yeah, I agree.
at a higher,
It's how we
like, really
define
calling
it
it out at a
matters.
higher
Yeah.
sort of level, right? It could mean all those things that we're talking about, right? Safe schools, it's behavioral health, it's
that's the thing.
restorative justice, it's,
Yes. I want to think about that, Gloria. I'm not denying. I mean, it has certainly come up, and we've been talking about safety from multiple perspectives for a while, and it's in the goals and metrics. So, yeah. I want to think about how to make that more explicit in the framework. That's excellent feedback, Gloria. I don't know.
I mean, to me,
Yeah,
it might
yeah.
fit under the second priority. This is clearly something that central office owns and has accountability for
It could.
offering safe schools,
Mhm.
right? So,
It totally could. Yeah, and yeah, that would make sense, actually.
TJ and then Dean.
Just real quick on the future one, looking at that slide again reminded me that with the Building Excellence Plan, since that's been presented in the context of future referenda, we have to be very, very careful with the use of the word support. The district cannot build support for a referendum, so.
Excellent point. Okay. Yes.
Dean?
The number
scratching that.
1 priority that we empower schools, and the the 5th one, embracing innovation. I like these, but similarly, along the lines of what TJ mentioned, is how we go about building, empowering the local schools, and then giving them the opportunity to innovate. Is we have heard many times throughout this last year and even prior, some of our excellent teachers have come here and told that strategies that they were using, and it's told us that strategies they were using that were really successful are no longer allowed to do. An example of one being the co-classes, mainly 3rd and 4th grade and things like that, that were successful with them, and they had a lot of success with it, and then they're told we can't do that anymore. So, sure. There are teachers that won't do well with that system, but then there are teachers that will do well with it, and it's up to those schools to be able
School-based
to
decision,
figure
yeah.
out how to do that. So what I'm concerned is that the innovation and risk-taking that goes on is only if the principal wants it,
Yeah.
and not empowering. Now, empowering our schools does not mean you empower the principal. It means you empower the staff working with the principal that maybe will do things even the principal is not comfortable with, but a whole bunch of his staff want to do it. And that type of stress, I think, is healthy. That type of conflict, not necessarily negative, It's that people getting out of their comfort zones, and you're working with 12 of your staff that want to do it this way, and the principal's going, man, I don't like that, but 12 of you here want to do it, you know, so that kind of conflict, I want to encourage. I want to see that encouraged, and I want to see principals being able to deal with that in a non-authoritative way. So how we, so for example, what if we get an internal proposal that rises to a significant reallocation of resources? But we've empowered the school and said that's what they want. It's not extra money, they just want to take it and do a different program within their school. What's our response going to be to something like that, that maybe people don't even like at Central District, but the school says, I want to do this. What are we going to do?
Dean, that's precisely why that shift exists. Because we all are in agreement, we want schools to have more flexibility in making those, we call them instructional design decisions. Looping is an instructional design decision, as an example. And I think that's exactly right. We want to get more clear on what the kind of must-haves are from a district-wide perspective, and there are some. The feedback that I've gotten after doing a year's worth of feedback sessions, I just did my last one on Friday afternoon at Hegel Elementary School, has been excitement about that shift, right, towards more autonomy, more ability to make school-based decisions. And there's a tension there too. I mean, because the general theme has been we don't want to go back either to a time where there was so much autonomy that we had no coherence as a school district. So we're trying to find the right balance. And one of the reasons we said what we said in Shift 1 under the first steps, grant more autonomy, but also to prototype and pilot an instructional design process, is because we feel like we need to learn a little bit about how to do what you're describing, right? I mean, how comfortable are we, not just the administrative team, but the board, and allowing more site-based flexibility when it comes to budget and allocation decisions, right? I think that's something that we're all going to have to work on a little bit. If we're actually going to enact the change that we're talking about. It's not just about sufficiency, it's about flexibility to use resources differently. So I don't know the answer yet, but I think what we're doing is committing to making that shift over time. Staff is excited about it, principals are really excited about it. And I think I'll say one last thing on this, Dean. When we think about empowerment of school communities, the strategic framework planning team at least feels that that community term is not just staff. It's parents and students as well having a voice in making decisions about their instructional design, right? Informing what that looks like. So I think it's really exciting, and we got some work to figure out how to enact it.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just concerned that everyone feels that they're in a position where they got heard.
Right.
And maybe they didn't quite get what they wanted, but they got heard.
Yeah.
And then buy-in should happen if the process is fair.
Yeah, I think so
And
too.
how we do the process, who composes and makes up the school-based teams, how they get on the team, those things are important, and there's more democratically,
Yes.
if we can do that, as more democratically as possible as opposed to handpick, that will help legitimize the
Yeah,
process.
I think so too.
Because we've heard complaints like that.
Oh, I know.
And to eliminate that, we just open the process up of who gets on that team.
Nikki and then teacher.
I was going to say as well on the school-based leadership team, just having details and being more transparent on how we select the people and what we expect of them would be huge.
I agree. I
And
agree.
Also, just that, again, less handpicking, more of the democratic, as Dean said, I think that's an excellent idea. My only fear on giving schools more autonomy, and I think it's a good thing, is I don't want, I know disability is my baby issue and that's it, but I don't want, for example, say, let's cut special ed here, here, and here to fund this, this, and this. I don't want that either.
Oh, yeah. The parameters still have to be tight. There are some places where they're too loose right now and
Correct.
actually need to be further tightened, and they need to be loosened in other places. I agree with that, Nikki. And next year will be a wonderful opportunity. It was Andrew's team 5 years ago that originally created the guidance for the school-based leadership teams. I don't know if you know that, but these guys are the authors of all that initial guidance. And we've learned a lot over these past 5 years. I mean, a lot. I think the next iteration is going to be much more powerful based on all the lessons that we've learned. Yeah, so it'll be a great opportunity, and that will then launch the updated SIP tool next spring.
We seem to have moved to the innovation
Yeah,
section.
I know.
And
We
part of
haven't
me wants to
really,
like continue this conversation now, and
Yeah.
I also have the sense that you'd kind of like to present a little bit, so I don't know what to do here, but
Well, why don't you say it? And
add a
then-
couple of things here. Number
Yeah.
one is I want to echo both what Dean said about kind of the participatory democracy aspects of this, and opening it up and room for dissent and tension. And echo what Nikki said about the transparency and kind of expand on what Nikki said about the transparency. I think that we have to be explicit about the processes by which innovation proposals operate. What is on the table, what isn't what is untouchable, what isn't untouchable, what level of resources can be used, what kind of design, is the length of the school day on the table, what's on the table, what's not, and also how the decisions are made for what gets approved and what doesn't get approved.
Yep.
And I also do think that whether it's in some kind of collective sense, I think that there's definitely, I think that there's a board role here that goes beyond monitoring. I think definitely monitoring, but I think it goes beyond monitoring. I think that if, right now we've got small innovation grants, and I don't think we may approve them, we may not, but we're pretty far from that process. And I think if we're talking about major shifts, and we have schools in some sense competing against each other in the sense that, this school wants this much freedom and they're denied it, this school wants this much freedom and they're granted it. I think there's a sense where that there is a board role in approving, not approving kind of things with that. And so I think that, and I think also a board role also creates a more transparent process. One where, we make our decisions in public, we make our decisions, we have public discussions. So, because right now I don't know, I can read this and I don't know what the depth, breadth of what's being contemplated with innovation here. I mean, I don't have a good sense of it. I don't know how extensive it is. So I think that we need to define that, and I think that needs to be a transparent process of defining it.
Well, let's get into the innovation discussion then, if that's all right, because we haven't quite gotten to it, and I want to try to keep our discussion here to an hour, given that we've got a couple other topics on tonight's agenda. So let me just move to that, and Andrew and I will talk for maybe another 10 minutes, and then we'll open it back up. So I just presented to you kind of a status update on the whole framework. And, I really intend, and I'm going to need your help on this, to under-promise and over-deliver on the framework. Because, we're talking about some pretty serious shifts that will not be able to happen by the fall, right? We're going to be doing this together over the next presumably 5-year phase. One of the things that we're exploring is what it would look like to build our skill set around innovation. The last meeting we had, we talked about one way of working that we felt needed some tightening up, and that was about scaling. When do we pilot? When do we scale? We had a really good discussion about that. Tonight we want to talk a little bit about innovation. At our retreat, we want to come back to sort of general performance management and continuous improvement, so that we can then codify all of those new ways of working and be ready to launch the next framework. Just as a reminder on scaling, I tried to paint a picture, not a very good one for you last time, but I tried my best, of our current practice around scaling. Where do we pilot things? What kinds of things are we scaling, and what are the processes that we use depending on the kind of thing it is? I walked you through that. There were some themes that came out of our discussion with you, with our central office leadership team, with some experts in the field on scaling, and these are some examples. We talked about how important it is to be deliberate up front, how important it is to have a plan for learning from the pilot before you make any decision about scaling. And one of those decisions could be to simply let something die and have that be okay. We talked about that spreading innovation is just not about more classrooms or more schools, but it's about attention to quality and depth and ownership. And we talked about sustainability, that if you don't have a plan for sustaining it, then you shouldn't be scaling it. Your feedback was excellent. We're going to be using that to try to get on paper what our processes are for scaling in the future. Today we wanted to shift to have a conversation about something where we don't think we have any too many current practices, and that is around innovation. And for us, the problem that we're trying to solve is what we do when there are challenges that don't have clear solutions. Scaling is usually about scaling things that are solved, right? You're just figuring out how to scale. We're taking it back a step and wanting to have a discussion about what we do when we've identified a problem and we don't even know what to implement. So I'm going to ask Andrew to tell you guys a little bit about our thinking on this.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to share current thinking and just see what kind of questions you have, see where we may align, where we may be different. So I'm hoping this is a good conversation. So innovation, what is it? There's a lot of interest out there within school districts, in industry for innovation, and a lot of different definitions for it. And we're settling in on some key concepts here. So innovation is a process, and it's not a thing. It's not the product. It's the way of working through a challenge that we're trying to focus in on and the skills we're trying to build. So that process can result in something that's never been seen before anywhere, totally novel. No district has ever tried it. We've never tried it. Or it might result in clarity that we need to try something that somebody else already has. So it may exist somewhere else and we just haven't tried it ourselves. But going through the process, and I'm going to lay out here in a couple of slides, gets you the best idea of it's the right thing to try. So innovation is a culture, and as a culture it has to be then cultivated. So there's a foundation to cultivate, and regardless of where innovation is being practiced in a school district or in an industry or promoted by a university, for example, innovation is founded on taking risks and rough prototyping. So the idea here is it's okay to try something, learn from it quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of time, money, effort into it. You don't have to try something for years and years. You can try it for a few weeks and see how it's going. It's built on trusting relationships to get a good exchange of ideas, and also to know that if something's not working, at least we've learned from it and we can build on that. Innovation is heavily based on voice and human values and empathy. It's built on feedback with users. It's very heavily built around and relies upon user experience. So again, it's not a user product, it's a user experience. That's what we're trying to design around. There's a bias toward action. This is a case where bias is a good thing. So it is, instead of thinking over and over and over about it and overthinking it, try a few things. Try some action, see what happens. Heavily collaborative process. A lot of conversation out there how to take your users and your designers and have them partner together. So this is a shared process, and then having a higher and better benefit come of that. And it's a proven process. There are methods for this. So the proven process that we're gravitating toward comes from Stanford's Design School, or D School, and it's called the Design Thinking Model. So to give you a bit of an orientation, the testing aspect, a lot of us are really good about seeing a problem and wanting to try something, have a good idea that that's the thing to try. And quite often we back up a bit to think, okay, we have a good understanding of what the issue is. Let's ideate or brainstorm a lot of different ways of doing this, ways we may solve a problem. Many of us, particularly in the district, are really good then at backing the process up even further into what's called design here, but we look at it as root cause analysis. So very, very good at that. Now, what makes this model very different is the explicit treatment of empathy, and that is understanding user experiences through conversation, surveys, interviews, immersion, observations, to have the best possible understanding of what your users are experiencing. So you're not coming in then with, as I backtracked, coming in with a solution. You're not feeling that you have an understanding of the problem and are coming up with ideas. You're not just looking at data or outcomes. You're not looking at your results. You're actually going to the source, which are the people that are experiencing the system that you have in place. There's an additional couple of steps in here, but one thing I want to highlight is that this appears to be a really linear model, and in fact it's not. As you build your understanding of your users' needs and the problem that you're trying to solve, there are stages, for example, during prototyping where you have an idea and you're building on that idea, and before you put it out in the field to see if it works, you go back to your users and ask, we heard you, we believe that you expressed this need, are we addressing that need? So it is often an iterative process. Also, I'll highlight National Equity Project has additions on both ends. So their participation and collaboration with the Stanford program indicates that there are ways of adding our equity lens to this process. So noticing is actually about yourself as a designer. So what are your personal biases, your own background? How do those inform your recommendations or your observations? I could say very shorthandedly, if you're really, really into technology, not everything needs to be a new app on your phone. So recognizing that about yourself gives you then perspective on the problems you're trying to solve. It's also recognizing power dynamics and the social context that our problems exist in. And then the other addition from NEP then is the reflection. So what truly are the outcomes, particularly as it relates to equity? So is it really working, and then is it really excelling in the area of equity? So that's just the organizer that we're using. So how does this then inform what innovation could look like in the district? We added this understanding to the two strategic framework planning sessions on March 21st and again on May 9. With a small work group, open comments available in a Google Doc for a smaller group of team members. We took our thinking to COLT at the beginning of May.
What is COLT?
A central office leadership team.
That's all I needed to know.
Yep. And we're beginning to engage experts outside of education to see what this actually looks like, and then presented some of our thinking to the principal advisory group, and then we're talking to you folks today. So this is our current thinking about what innovation can be in the district. Now keep in mind that this is the all-in version. So after we've been doing this for a period of time, this is what the full package would look like. So it'll take some time to get some of these into place. But looking at, first of all, developing our capacity, as Jen had indicated, we know that there's a great deal of enthusiasm around innovation, but there are ways of working that are learned and proven ways of working that would benefit us. So identifying key staff to deepen that knowledge and that capacity. First step is teaching ourselves, and then the second test then, or second step then, is taking it out and testing that understanding by running innovation and problem-solving sessions with staff in buildings, leadership in schools, departments. And then building upon that experience and that capacity then is facilitating them through that process. So a school team, for example, would own the full innovation process. We also have the ability to use then multiple locations to address shared problems that are more broadly faced across the district, and then also engaging in the community itself for those issues that are born beyond MMSD. And then back to this kind of the foundation of the work. So we do have a lot of enthusiasm for innovation. We all have varying definitions of what it is, but we do know that that's an asset. We do know that we can further our culture of trust and risk-taking, elevating voices, engaging families, students, and staff to help better understand issues and engage them in the problem-solving process. So when we talk about cultivating that grassroots asset, that's one of those pieces that will evolve also.
I want to just to clarify something. We're thinking that innovation is different and distinct from the conversation we just had about autonomy and flexibility to make site-based decisions around instructional design. Those two things may meet on occasion, right? If there is a problem with not a clear solution and an instructional design that's never been utilized in any of our schools that a school wants to try, right? You may actually use this process for that Andrew just laid out in order to prototype something. But I want to make sure, I think it's easy to start to conflate the two things, and we see them as different and distinct. This is a process that you would utilize in very specific scenarios in order to develop prototypes to try out that could then become something that you take to scale.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure that we can
Yep.
finish
I know
at 6
that.
when our next meeting is scheduled, so.
Yeah, we're
Gloria?
just looking for
just
gut
quickly.
reaction.
So the prototype, I mean, is the flexibility held within the school and teachers on what prototype they're going to use this pathway? I mean, is there going to be some flexibility, or is there going to be a process
I think
of approval?
Yeah, initially it would be pretty small. I mean, so as a result, we're talking about training just a handful of staff members. So initially, it's going to be a fairly limited and pretty quiet undertaking. I think once you do build out to the full model and we have a good understanding and appreciation for the innovative process decentralized out in our schools, then you would start to see smaller teams and much more decentralized, kind of more organic innovation happening that way.
And I think we're envisioning that over time, if we could build the skill set around innovation, and we don't want to micromanage it, right? People should be using that skill set, right, of empathizing, et cetera, all the way through to prototyping and reflecting on the effects of the prototype. I'd love to see that happening all over the place in really organic ways. There will, I would hope that there would be some bigger district-wide projects that we would be applying this process to that would have much more visibility and approval. I mean, it kind of really depends on the size and scope of the problem and the project. But yeah, I mean, for us, it's really more about teaching people the process.
Laura?
Well, one thing that just stood out to me that I thought was really important, just that I've been hearing from teachers a lot lately, is the networked improvement communities.
Yeah.
I think that stood out to me just because I think the schools, or at least high schools, we share a lot of the same problems. And I oftentimes see solutions coming to fruition and making things better in other places while they like stay stagnant in others. And I'm always like, well, what are they doing that's working and why can't we do it here? So I think staff would really enjoy having the opportunity like provided for them to make those connections so they don't have to like seek it out themselves in their own busy schedules. One like question I had, or thing to think about as well, is I think this is a lot of like the front ending of innovation, but I think something that like completes it is the end half in terms of being able to be reactive in terms of once you receive the feedback from how these things are working, like change quickly. Because I think one thing that distinguishes oftentimes, I don't know, we're using Stanford's design process like Silicon Valley. I think one thing that they do is they can like react really quickly and like turn around and they don't get like bogged down. So I think having that end of the feedback loop as well as how you get innovation out is like how do you complete it would be important as well.
I think, Laura, I just need to get this one thing on the table because I think it's really important. Large bureaucracies in the public sector, right, we're just not nimble.
Right.
So figuring out how do you allow for innovation that can move quickly is a major question that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Teacher?
4 or 5 things. I'm trying to make them really quick to respect the time. Number one, both innovation and process are nouns in this aspect, and I'm not quite sure why we are confusing parts of speech. Number 2, I mean, it just, they're both nouns. And I can understand that you want to say that you want to talk about a process, but a process is also a noun. So, we're supposed to be teaching, and this is just grammatically incorrect. Number 2, I'm not clear who the users are, this terminology of user. Something that's not working for youth. We have students who are not learning to read. Who is the user?
The student's not able to read.
The students. And so we're supposed to have user experience and feedback from students and it's supposed to be short term. So a 7th grader who can't read is supposed to go through 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, and then give a user experience, and we're not going to look at other metrics. I have real problems with this, and I have to say that I do think we have a process that's been in our district for a long time, which is much more suited for K-12 education, which is the classroom action research process. Well established in our district. I've looked at the K-12 work out of the design school at Stanford, and what I see is a bunch of TFA grads playing with other people's money and not really doing anything. They've done almost nothing. And they go to conferences and they teach people about design, and nothing comes out of it. I'm very, very skeptical of this approach. That's it. That's what I have to say.
Well, thanks for sharing that, TJ. That's interesting to me. Other thoughts?
I think we have to be open to all forms of how we move off of the status quo. And if the model has been around for decades and useful and helpful, then why are we in the situation that we're in? You know, I don't know about you, but I'm just tired of our students of color, African American students, not thriving in Madison. And I don't say it's just our schools. It is a community. I think we have to, but I do believe that we have to be part of that ownership. And I think it will take doing things differently. And I think that we can't afford to just go, everyone have their own idea and go at it. Because actually we used to be there, where everyone did their own thing.
Right.
And that's part of how we got to where we are. So I'm really open. I don't know if this is the right framework or not, but I'm very much open to saying how we have a framework on which we evaluate and look at prospects for change. And I don't particularly see why it should be distinct between what were the school level autonomy around changing things and the innovation process. I need to understand that more, because I think about, and I do come from the business sector, but it reminds me of a very, one of the most powerful methodologies and processes around improvement was continuous improvement, where you basically empowered the people in manufacturing on the floor. They were very much involved in the process of how to redesign the processes, but there was training that came, a facilitator in essence, who would help facilitate those teams so that they did have a framework around how to get their thoughts incorporated. And so I think having a process around which we, how we innovate is incredibly important. And I think our only chance here of moving off of the status quo in a major way is on figuring out how we can do things differently, but not going down a path that feels good to us all.
Right.
But without the benchmarks and the checking and the iteration that actually results in positive change over the long term.
Yeah, I'll just say this last thing because I do know that we have to wrap up. There are important processes that need to be used intentionally for different circumstances. Continuous improvement in our district is never going away. It is a critically important process. Our teacher teams use it, our school-based leadership teams use it, our senior leadership team uses it, and we'll talk about that more at the board retreat. This is just basic performance management and refinement of practice in a cyclical way. I think TJ's comments worry me a little bit because what we don't want for people to think is we're creating a free-for-all where everyone gets to use this innovative process to apply to any concern that they have. If a child isn't reading, we're not proposing actually that you use the design thinking process to figure out how to teach a child to read. That's actually not at all what we're proposing. We could be proposing at the middle school level where we've seen that reading intervention actually has a negative effect on students' identities as human beings, and no one seems to have figured out how to intervene appropriately at middle school while keeping an adolescent's identity intact, right? I'm making this up on the spot, but you might use the design thinking process to empathize with a group of students, right? And really understand how to get them the skills that they need in an environment that values their identity as young people, especially young people of color. So I think our precision about when you use which processes where is why this is in the ways of working section, right? Because it's about being much more intentional about when we use processes to solve what kinds of problems. But this was incredibly important, I think, for us. Andrew, are you good? Do you have what you need?
Well, hold on, because I don't think, and I'd just like do one final,
Let's
and
do that.
that's, so anyone who's already
Thank you,
spoken, I
Mary.
think, but who hasn't gotten their thoughts in, I'd like to
So one of the
give them
questions,
that opportunity.
one of the questions in the document is just what would we have you consider for the next iteration?
Yeah, please.
I think, look, you guys are talking about this as a process. I'd love to see who's managing this process. Are there stage gates throughout where somebody is making a decision? Does this fit? Does this not? What are the time frames involved?
Yeah.
What are the funding and who's making those choices? Is that a school-based choice or a district-based choice? So those are some of the questions that I would have that might provide a little bit more clarity around what this process actually looks like and what it would apply for. So it's hard to, a lot of this I actually think lives in number one to the point that we've circled
They're
around.
connected, yeah.
So some of that precision might help me understand what we're talking about.
That's great, Kate. And we're thinking that the innovation processes that we would learn could actually apply to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It could support any aspect of the framework.
Just putting down on paper what the process is, more than just kind of the conceptual, would help.
Okay. Thanks, Kate.
Dean, did you have any closing questions or comments? James?
No, I'm just trying to get my head around the way I've always thought about innovation, and the way I've worked in innovation. My lifetime it's been thought about as a process. Because it seemed like when you talk about a process, it seems limiting to me. What jumps out for me here is innovation as a culture. Innovates. sense to me. Innovation as a culture must be cultivated. People must be flexible. They must have the ability to think freely and to be innovative. When we talk about a process, that's something I have to think about because that seems limiting. And when we talk about innovation and limiting, they're at opposing ends. And so I have to think about how we've been talking about this because the notion of a process for innovation, I would never want to put constraints on our scientists, for example. It should be boundless, and we have the freedom to think freely and to be as innovative as possible. So I see it more as a culture and to be cultivated, and that I can relate to. But the process piece I have to think about.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it, and we'll continue our talk at the retreat at the end of this month, where we hope to finalize the big ideas for the framework. All right. Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, and I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Laura, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Should we kick right in?
Yeah.
All right, let's kick right in. I'd like to call to... not have any public appearances. So the second order of business is the approval of the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated April 2nd, 2018.
Moved.
Moved by Dean. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Nikki. Laura, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That was your last vote, so let's all give Laura, this is your last meeting, right? Oh, no, you get to vote on adjournment, but we'll all be real busy on that, so that's it. Thank you for your service, Laura, and it's been good to know you, and best wishes. You're gonna go good places.
Absolutely.
Make sure you keep that finish right.
Okay. And Barb reminds me you get to take your nameplate and treasure it always. But not the stand. I don't think you get the stand. Did you get the stand? No,
I don't
just
think
the
so.
top.
Just the top.
We have an important but relatively simple agenda tonight. We have 3 different partnerships, 2 with some adjustments and 1 with, well, all 3 with some adjustments, but 1 with a renewal. And I believe Jessica Henke, our strategic partnerships person, I don't know who else is going to be presenting. And Armando, whose last name I forgot. Hernandez, thank you. Yes. Thank you for the reminder. Sure. And I hope I didn't mispronounce your first name because I'm feeling that way right now. Superintendent Cheatham, would you like to introduce anything about these partnerships, or we just kick right in?
Just jump right in?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
All right. So the
right.
first one is an amendment to the Elementary Schools of Hope Partnership. Jessica, take it away.
Thank you, TJ. So as TJ noted, we have 3 partnerships that we'll be discussing this evening. Briefly, both Elementary Schools in Hope and Behavioral Health in Schools have amendments proposed. Both are carrying or operating under active MOAs that are good through 2019, but we want to bring forward slight adjustments to those. And then the People renewal will open up for a more robust discussion after we tackle the amendments. So Elementary Schools of Hope, as you likely know, currently is serving about 20 of our elementary schools, open to all students with an explicit focus on serving students of color and generally a low-income status through literacy tutoring during the school day. Earlier this year, we were informed by Centro Hispano that their board has decided to exit the partnership, really primarily driven by some strategic planning that they've undertaken over the past year or so, with a desire to really strengthen their focus on growing their adult programming, tightening their focus on transition programming in middle and high school, and really deepening their engagement with the Latino community through those existing programs. So upon notification by Centro, we, alongside United Way of Dane County, our other partner in Elementary Schools of Hope, engaged in an analysis of what were our next steps from there. we determined we would be following the model that's been very successful at our high school level with the Achievement Connections programming, serving algebra tutoring, where MMSD and United Way are the sole partners. We're extremely pleased with how that's been working and feel like moving forward with just the two of us as partners will ensure the smoothest transition for our schools, and there'll be no direct impact on our schools in that change. So with that, the amendment details a proposal to just basically move forward with the partnership between United Way and MMSD. United Way would be taking on the organizational infrastructure for the program. That includes housing the actual staff for Schools of Hope, managing all of the financial operations, and providing programmatic space for that effort. So we truly feel like our strong partnership with United Way will ensure a smooth transition overall, and we are certainly moving forward with the model as it's been going very well in our elementary schools under the current MOA. So,
Nikki?
Yeah.
May we ask on the, is it only on the
Absolutely.
amendment or on the MOA in general?
If the amendment's what's before us, but go ahead and ask, because I don't know where it's going to go.
In this case, it was.
Yeah.
Just on the, I was looking at the behavior piece of the specific targets, goals, and outcomes on instructor time, attendance, and behavior. The number, then we're to keep track of the number of behavioral incidents that are level 2 or higher. Does that, how do we do that on students who are not governed by the behavior education plan due to disability?
Is that one under, could you point me to the page
Sure.
you're referencing?
Sorry,
Thank
under
you.
4, specific targets, goals, and outcomes?
The full MOA.
Are you may be looking at,
Am I looking at the wrong one?
you may be looking at behavioral health in schools.
I looked at the wrong one.
Double
Forgive
check.
me. I looked at the wrong one.
Not a problem. We'll be
Sec-
jumping into that.
But I do
quite
have one
quickly.
other question on this.
Sure.
Will there be any cost change? Will United Way be picking up the cost, et cetera, Hispanico? Will it change the amounts at all?
No, so the overall budget will not change. We may find some cost savings in terms of the rental. So there were rental fees associated with using Centro Hispano space. Bringing it in-house to United Way may allow us some reduction in costs there. So there are no increases to my knowledge.
Gloria?
So I know that you predominantly use the space at Centro.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if there's going to be an impact on having Latino children part of this program, and so how are we going to work
Good
through that?
question. I think our interest is certainly in continuing to work closely with Centro Hispano to recruit bilingual tutors. I think that is the primary consideration around Centro's role in carrying out the program in support of our Latino students, especially with the program operating at so many schools with DLI programs. So I think we would intend to continue working with Centro and other partners locally to ensure that we have a solid pipeline of bilingual tutors coming into the program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question indirectly on this. You mentioned Achievement Connections.
Yeah.
Is Achievement Connections a high-intensity partnership?
No, it's a medium intensity. So,
Yeah, it's just, people have been talking about it a lot lately, and I'm like, I never see that.
so I'm
Maybe I'll-
happy, certainly this August, alongside all of our partnership renewals, we will certainly be sending the annual monitoring report. And so if you have any questions or interest in more information, we can
Thank you.
share that.
And a reminder to the board and the public that this is a vote item at the June meeting.
Correct.
So
Yes.
we will be up for it.
All right.
Any other questions on Elementary Schools of Hope memoranda of amendment?
Good.
All right, let's
All right.
move
We're
on
done.
to the second one, which is also an amendment. And this is an amendment to the behavioral mental health partnerships.
Yes, absolutely. So behavioral health in schools is the second amendment being brought forward this evening. This is why I have Armando kindly sitting alongside me as he oversees that work through the district. Currently, the partnership is among the district, Catholic Charities, UW School of Social Work, and Dane County Public Health. As you recall, this is the effort undertaken to place mental health clinicians in our schools to work collaboratively with our student services team to provide mental health supports in the school. Given the planned expansion of service to 3 additional schools that was noted in our original MOA, we anticipated that there may be a need to consider a different or additional partner to provide clinical services to 8 full schools in 2018-2019. As a result, the team issued a formal RFP, and through that process determined that Catholic Charities would continue its service in 5 schools, and we would also be adding Children's Service Society through the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin to the partnership to serve the 3 new schools joining the partnership in 1819. So this is kind of the primary driver of the amendment being brought forward, recognizing also the 3 new schools to be served, Alice, Nuestro Mundo, and Blackhawk. And additional detail and I think clarifications were made to the roles and responsibilities for our clinical providers that match then the RFP that was issued, and an updated budget has been provided for 18-19. I think we're certainly excited to continue this work. Armando, if you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly that, in fact, yeah, our team is very excited about expanding into another 3 schools, particularly a second middle school, to continue the success of this program. Also, the expansion into another community-based partnership will just give us the capacity as we looked into the future with the hopes of expanding further to give us that capacity and that support. Children's Hospital Wisconsin comes with a lot of experience as a large organization. They've been involved in both Racine and Milwaukee in doing school-based mental health. So I think they're well positioned to really join again our success with Catholic Charities as we look forward.
Thank you on this, and thank you for seeing the expansion through. This partnership comes up for a renewal next year on 9/19/18. So I guess as we go forward, that we've kind of brought in 2 providers now. And the last time you were before the board talking about this, I had a sense that this is an area where multiple board members would like to see a greater expansion next time it comes before us, not this time for the amendment, but then. And so just kind of 2 questions. One is, how is the groundwork being laid for that? And the second is, do you kind of, in light of this, do you anticipate that we'd be bringing in 3, 4, 5 partners, or do you think where are we going to go with that?
Yeah, so I would. Yeah, so I would definitely agree that we're setting the ground for ongoing expansion. I think the questions around the pace of expansion, I think, will be dependent on a number of factors. I think the fact that we have 2 partners, I think it addresses one of them, which is just capacity. Just on the idea of having organizations that can be supportive, can hire clinicians, etc. I think with the current grant that we have, the pace that we're looking at is around the one that we're following right now in terms of looking between 2 and 4 schools. But I think we're certainly open if we wanted to increase that pace to have those conversations. There's certainly the financial funding component associated with it. So part of our decision making was that next year, as we look at the 3-year evaluation of the program, that would be the right time to really consider those larger questions, examining the outcomes and really the implementation progress, to then say, all right, do we continue the current pace, or do we take a bigger leap?
I think that I'd like to at least float the idea that as we go into budget discussions for the 1920 budget, that the possibility of picking up more of this through local funding as opposed to grants are great, and if we can get the grants and we can get the partnerships, I'm all for that. But I also think that this may rise to the importance where, as we go into and so if, as we, we're not even close to talking about the 1920 budget, but I think that I'd like to put that out there since you're before us today. And Kate?
Couple of questions. The first one is, how were the schools selected for next year?
Yeah, so we put an open process to all the schools, all elementary and middle schools who were interested. So we have 11 schools that had interest in it, and then we had a central office team that also had some school-based representation, essentially established a criteria, and all the schools submitted an application. I think maybe about 5 or 6 questions. And in summary, the two biggest components for the application that we were looking for was need and also readiness. And in the component of readiness, we were looking at their student services team. The key role in the implementation of behavioral health in schools is a student services coordinator, usually either a nurse, school psychologist, or school social worker, who is the key link between the clinician and the school and the student services team. So we were looking for schools that really had the right teaming processes and robust enough student services team to be able to support this work, and also that they displayed at least a history of either social emotional learning supports or mental health work in particular. So out of those, I think if we had more capacity, we probably would have selected more than 3, but those 3 schools really came out on top.
Okay. I mean, is there anything that we should be doing for future expansion to increase readiness with some of the other schools this year outside of this scope of this MOA?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I did with the schools is I certainly made myself available to them on that question in particular, to really said that I'm happy and willing to work with them. And I think there were probably a number of other schools that we would say were completely ready, and then some others that could benefit from additional support. So I think one of the elements is to be available to increase interventions. We have other initiatives that I think, so just one example, many of you are familiar with CBITS or Bounce Back, right? Initiatives that involved looking at data, providing supports, delivering interventions. And those type of initiatives, I think, are the ones that can get them ready and with the type of experience to then be successful at a program like BHS.
I mean, maybe for the next time we talk about the BAP, I mean, they're not quite the same, but it would be good to be thinking about readiness for this as at the same time as we're thinking about kind of social emotional education, et cetera.
Yeah, and if I may, I think that those are definitely connected. As we look at the culture and climate visits, part of that process is definitely to look at their intervention systems, the behavioral response, and that work of examining their systems connected to behavioral education plan, it's certainly connected to this.
2 other just quick things. One, in your verbal commentary, you said that Children's Hospital of Wisconsin was going to be serving all 3 new schools. In the writing, it says just 2.
2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. That's
yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And then I mean, there are 2 counterparties here. Is there a reason this is just one MOA instead of 2 separate ones?
Do you want me to?
Do you mean?
I mean, the 2 different parties are going to be administering this, right? So is that?
Yeah, so it's 2 different parties, but it's one program. So I think it's one MOA because it really is a partnership, and in the way that the program is designed and delivered, we're really all in the same table. They will be 2 separate contracts, however. So maybe that's, I don't know if you would add anything to it.
No, that's accurate.
Okay.
So, good catch, and thank you for the catch on the.
It doesn't matter. I just wanted to make
Yep.
sure it was.
Nope,
written
we'll be
properly,
changing
so.
that for the final vote. Thank you.
And just want to add, and there's a 3rd party at the table, which is Dane County, correct? Or a 4th party?
Well, there's other parties, not Dane County. They're not technically part of the MOA. The University of Wisconsin School of Social Work and then Public Health are the other parties in the MOA.
Dean?
Yeah, so if I get this right, the Catholic Charities and Children's Hospital will not be sharing schools or working with similar students. They'll
Correct.
be completely separate
Correct.
in who they're working with.
Correct.
So Catholic Trails will have 6 schools, hospitals will have 2, is that what you said?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and we decided that maybe this is, the Catholic Charities will be working with Black Hawk, which is the second middle school. We felt that because they're currently are working with Senate, that would make sense as far as them serving our middle schools. So Children's is taking on 2 elementary schools. Also because they're half-time positions from the hiring perspective, that also made sense for them to essentially hire 1 full-time person with the hope that they will serve 2.
The other 8 schools that didn't get picked, were they also is this restricted to elementary and middle school here?
Yes.
This program is
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those, okay, so as TJ was mentioned, that as far as expanding into those, we have 8 schools and 8, we're hitting 50% of the need apparently. So I don't think that's good. Or good enough. It's not good enough. It's
Yeah.
good, but it's not good enough yet. So I think a way to expand this dramatically, quickly, or quicker, would be in all our best interests. Something we'd all like to see here, I think.
I would agree with you.
And I want to just add one more thing on expanding. Expanding can also mean expanding the level of services. You referenced that that they work half-time, that the people assigned to schools half-time, and particularly with some of our larger schools, I know that at Leopold that there was a number of people there this year who said, can we get them up to 3/4 time? Can we get them up? And that, so I think expanding can also mean, not adding schools, but also adding services at the
Agreed.
schools we're already
To
at.
that point, Leopold has more students, I would guess, than Freight Callis and Western Mendota
Yeah.
put together.
Yeah, I mean, I was at Mendota just a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about wishing they had more services within their school as well.
That's right.
And, yeah.
And we are looking at some creative ways. Again, some of the other mental health support interventions, we're looking to expand those to the current BHS schools. But absolutely, I think it's particularly the middle schools and our larger elementary schools. Makes sense.
All right, well, we look forward to continuing this conversation and expanding this program both.
Same here. Absolutely.
And again, thank you for your work. And the last one is the People Program.
Yes.
And take it away, Jessica.
Great. So I'm going to call Erica Kruger, our lead school counselor, up to join.
Hi, Erica.
Thanks, Erica. So yes, people renewal. So slightly different than our amendments. This is a full renewal. The term for the People Partnership is ending essentially this August. And so before I hand over the presentation to Erica, who will kind of give a high-level flyover of the evaluation, the findings, its implications for the program and the MOA, and also some efforts to support continuous improvement, I wanted to touch on 2 different items that I've been directly involved in that will likely be of interest to our board. So first, as you saw in the supporting materials, one key proposed change to the MOA is the term. So this is the first time we'd be proposing a 5-year term, which is different than our typical 3-year MOA for high-intensity partnerships. The driver for that is really to sync with UW's intended evaluation schedule. So as many of you know, typically with 3-year renewals, we carry forward an external evaluation with that. Oftentimes that's funded either through the partnership or with funds through the district out of the strategic partnerships budget. Aligning with the schedule for UW's evaluation allows us to avoid any duplication of evaluation efforts and means that we get to reserve those funds for other purposes internally. So our hope would be to sync up with that 5-year schedule so that we're not doing double evaluation. Second, as many of you are aware, there's been quite a bit of conversation both in the community and internally here within the district and our partners about ensuring that all students, especially those most vulnerable in relation to immigration status, have access, and in particular access to the People Program. We've been talking to UW for good number of weeks now on navigating this challenge, and especially the specific criteria of the PEOPLE application and pre-college program around requiring U.S. citizenship. We are thrilled to share that late last week we received notice from UW and the PEOPLE team that they are committed to removing that eligibility requirement moving forward. So this is what we feel like is a big win. And I certainly want to thank both Erica and the team internally, but the Chancellor, Patrick Sims, Leslie Orantia, Cheryl Gittens, and Gail Ford, all out of UW, who I think have been working tirelessly on behalf of ensuring access for all our kids. So just want to call that out and celebrate the start. So I'm going to pass it over to Erica to kind of give a flyover, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to start by just sharing the first evaluation that PEOPLE really conducted, which is part of the rationale for some of the program changes that you'll see reflected in the MOA. So that was something they had contracted through Northwest Education, and it was completed at the end of the 2015 school year. And some of the big takeaways from that evaluation process that are relevant for us, one is that they had multiple places in which they were conducting the PEOPLE program, including Madison, Milwaukee. And so one of the recommendations was to really focus their program with a common entry point, and also to focus the kind of services and curriculum that they were providing more to be consistent across the places that they were serving. They had another recommendation from the evaluation to increase their focus on persistence. So some of the data from the first evaluation showed that while they were supporting their PEOPLE students into accessing college and actually maintaining really good data as far as grade point average, so some of the performance data was quite good, they weren't seeing particular gains in 4- and 6-year grad rates from college. So really looking at some of the work that they were doing, shifting from more of a tutoring focus to more of a skills building focus. So things like persistence, exploring supports, advocacy. A third recommendation was to broaden their advising, because another takeaway that they saw was they actually, although they have this established relationship at UW-Madison, they are seeing more students exploring other schools in the UW system and beyond that. So really looking at the ways in which they were supporting students in accessing information about a full complement of post-secondary options. And the fourth big takeaway was just something that they were very aware of, that they wanted to improve their own data collection and evaluation processes. They really haven't had a strong system in place to do that internally. So what that means in terms of things that you will see in the new MOA is that they have moved from a 6th grade entry, so the kind of second half of our 6th grade year, to an 8th grade entry. This has actually already affected our program in the last couple of years. So we don't currently have 7th grade students or 6th graders sort of in this process. So our new next cohort of PEOPLE students will be 8th graders next year who will have access to the program sometime in the fall or winter when the application cycle will begin. And then they would formally enter the program in the summer between their 8th and 9th grade year. There is the intention to provide some spring programming, some kind of orientation and exposure programming, but PEOPLE is still working on the details of what that will look like. Another change is that in focusing their program, they have had a small kind of elementary school arm that has sustained into this year, but as of the coming school year, they will no longer be offering PEOPLE prep as an elementary support. So they are closing that part of their program. Another shift has been in terms of some of the supports that they're offering in the curriculum and the structure of their supports. So with middle school students, they've really spent this year refining some of the kind of curriculum and support that happens for students when they meet during the school year. And they've shifted from more of a pure tutoring model to actually involving a lot of project-based learning and then focusing on things like problem solving, skill building, advocacy, and some of the knowledge and skills that they believe will be connected to supporting better outcomes in high school and more of that college persistence support as well. So those are changes, the majority of the main changes that you'll see reflected in the MOA. The pieces that have really come out of our own monitoring process in terms of our continued partnership conversations, you'll see a little bit reflected as well. So the main takeaways from our ongoing monitoring have been around the need to sort of strengthen the alignment and collaboration that we have across people and MMSD. So looking at ways that we can both help people be more informed about some of the work that's happening in the district around academic and career planning, pathways, high school choices, the counseling work that we do at middle school and high school to support college and career readiness, and being more informed about how people, especially now that they're revamping some of their curriculum, how people is exploring this idea of persistent support and advocacy support. So we're looking for ways in the coming year. We've already started to try and increase opportunities for our middle school counselors in particular to have more information about people and more connection to the program, and also for us to have more opportunities for people to understand our work a little bit better. So in the fall and again in the spring, we convened a whole set of pre-college partners, including people in ITA and some of the other programs, to start creating a little bit more of a community within that group. And the last piece that really shows up in the monitoring report is some ongoing work that we're trying to do to fine-tune logistics to support their staff with infinite campus access and things that are a little bit more technical in nature. So that's reflected in some of the additional steps in the MOA.
Nikki?
I just have one question on the people attachment, which is page 16, it's like the last page, where it says on intervention and support model and possible termination from the program. A student can also be dismissed for severe behavioral concerns or non-participation of the program. By severe behavioral concerns, we don't mean manifestation of disabilities, do we?
No.
With the 5-year partnership, I think that, and we won't see an evaluation for 5 years, is there any ways that have come up into strengthening the monitoring during that period to kind of see that we're on track? I've got a couple of things which don't really strengthen it, they kind of put it in a different place, but I was wondering if your team had, or UW people had contemplated any changes in the monitoring metrics. It looks like the inappropriate ones have been removed and they've been reformatted, but essentially it's what was there before. So have there been any discussions around that?
I think at this time, it's certainly the commitment to continue the annual monitoring process, reporting out on the outcomes. And I think one thing that has been, I think, powerful for partnership teams as we've created habits and routines around the monitoring process, that now we're starting to look at trend data on a more regular basis. So I think that would be something that we would be committing to as opposed to just taking each year in isolation. So as you see in the monitoring report this year, it's showing a kind of the 3-year trend, and so building on that continuously as opposed to having kind of report outs on a individual year in isolation.
I know agreeing to goals is difficult, so I'm not going to ask for that, but it's like a couple of places where maybe monitoring without goals might be, you can float adding. One is enrollment in honors/AP courses and or success in honors/AP courses. I'm thinking of kind of the metrics that we're using for things like Abbott and things like that, and also with the work we're doing around that. The other place is kind of, well, second thing has to do with student selection. And we don't have any demographic breakdown, but if you look at the UW report, we can see a huge demographic shift away from African American students, a shift away from male students, and related, and I don't know how much of that is reflected from Milwaukee students, because it's primarily Milwaukee and Madison kids in this program. And so I guess that if we could monitor who of our students are participating, and again, without goals, just have it included in the monitoring report. And I guess, and the third thing is something Jessica talked about, which is if you look at, we have students who are enrolled in People, students who are enrolled in Avid, students who enrolled in a number of programs, and anecdotally what we hear is that there's a lot of students who enrolled in 3 or 4 of our college prep or college access programs. And so I think it's good to know, both to know program quality, but also is there a synergy going on here? And so if we can, again, not a goal, but just to know this, to know what's going on.
Yeah, let me speak to both of those questions, essentially. I think your point about just the monitoring around common metrics used for the district, I think that is something that we're getting a bit better on. We've worked with the RPEO team, the Research Program Evaluation Office, to develop annual data snapshots that actually pull kind of the demographics and the common metrics that the district uses as a supplemental monitoring report. That's something that I didn't include here, but it will come with all of our annual reports that we share out usually in August. And I think I would be interested in taking a look at those to review them in alignment with the new metrics and goals established for our strategic framework moving forward. So that is something that can happen and will be shared with the board. So that will address many of, I think, the questions you're raising around additional metrics to be monitored. Yeah.
And the last one, just because you're on a roll, but retention attrition also.
Okay.
So just if you want to incorporate that into your response.
Sure.
Can we also include number of students with disabilities?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we'll let Jessica continue, and then we'll go to Gloria.
As for duplication
Sorry,
of students, I think this is one area that I'm extremely excited about related to the work of MOST, and the Madison Out of School Time effort around developing an information system. Essentially, that information system will allow us to do exactly as you say, start looking at an individual student and their engagement in multiple community-based programs throughout our city. So we are in the kind of emergent stages of that system, building the customized information system, and then we'll be piloting that early next year and be bringing on additional community-based providers over time. UW and the People program has already expressed interest in actually entering that effort with us, and certainly working with Langston Evans and Avid in looking at the opportunities there as well. So I have high hopes for future ability to actually make sense of who's accessing what as an individual across the city. So thank you for that.
Gloria?
Yeah, just want to go back to the undocumented status. It's taken off their application, right? I don't see it included in the MOU. Is there an opportunity, or is it? And
No,
I just missed it.
No, it is not.
Okay. And is there a reason why, or?
I think it was recognition initially that we did flag it. It was included originally, and that started our conversation with people and saying, what can we do here and what are the opportunities? And at that time, they recognized that they were working through it and certainly moved to a place of kind of satisfaction for us on that initial criteria. I think it certainly is something that we could easily incorporate to just reflect and affirm that commitment.
Yeah, I would like that.
I would as well.
Okay. Mary?
Yeah, I would echo TJ's point with regards to African American students. And if we've seen, as a district, we have not seen much progress over the last 5 years, regardless of the additional investments that we have been making in programs to see the needle move with regards to African American students enrolling in post-secondary. And I think we have to lean on our partners to emphasize that this is of importance, and we have to work together to understand. I think there are real hurdles. I don't think it's lack of trying or intent, but I think we have to be realistic and look at the data to say we haven't been making the same progress we've been making with Latino students, and what do we need to do differently? The district and our partners together, but I think we have to start seeing a significant shift because we aren't seeing African American students enrolling in these programs in the same numbers, or at least any increase as the programs grow.
I think that is a question that they're really curious about as well, and part of the reason that they're trying to amp up their own internal systems. This first evaluation was one of the most substantive that they had really conducted around their program, so developing more systems so that they can do ongoing monitoring, I think will also give us some more ideas for the kinds of metrics, whether formal or more informal, that'll be available. I know, for instance, they're really curious about how to kind of codify indicators of college readiness around those areas of more qualitative things like persistence and identity and aspiration. And so they're really trying to figure out now what would it look like to be doing some monitoring and measuring. So I think there are things that we'll also learn from their experience.
And I would strongly encourage that there is, that we as a district have our partners working together. Because Avitops has seen the same thing. And I think I'll speak just from the Avitops perspective, I think the overlap with people is not a duplication as much as it's a reinforcement and additional resources. Certainly there might be some areas where there's overlap, but I don't think students as a whole are feeling that there's too many services, at least I can say, between those programs. So that's not as big of a concern. But I actually, when we talk about innovation, I'd like to see innovation around, I'm all for like the research and the studies, but I feel a greater sense of urgency as to like right now, what we just know we're not reaching our African American students, particularly our African American male students, at the same rates as we should be, and I think we should use our partners, what data we have, and start innovating around it.
So maybe we'll see some changes before we vote?
Yes.
Good. And
real quick,
anything else, Dean?
Yeah, I noticed that the elimination of the elementary programming seemed to almost happen by default, and now it's recognized. Is there something of value there that's missing now that we should perhaps look at in a different way?
Yeah, it was a smaller program, and I know that the communities that it served are sad to see it go. So in fact, Mendota sort of had an interest in grabbing on to some of the same programming and beginning to incorporate it at their site. So I was recently talking with them about what other options might be available to supplement that. For people, I think it was a combination of looking for focus and also some fiscal constraints the university placed on them. So they had to get pretty targeted. Yeah, for people, I think the decision was partly fiscal because of constraints at the university, and partly the idea to really focus their energy on that pre-college later starting point of 8th grade. But I think you bring up a good point, and I think it would be good for us to be checking in with the community centers where people prep was happening and find out if they have alternate plans or how we could help support.
I think a little earlier we discussed in our presentation, I don't know if you were here, about sometimes it's okay to let something die, but it has to be purposeful. And I'm not certain when something like this happens that if we've applied what we talked about earlier to this and just made a choice to prioritize somewhere else and let something good go or not. So I think going forward from what we heard today is that the process we would like to see when we stop something is that there's a reason, explicit, and then move on to something else that's fine. Just wondering, and I'm not even saying that happened here, I'm just wondering that, they seem to have just stopped it on their own, and then now we went a different direction, and how much of a discussion and actual data was reviewed to justify that move. I don't know. But going forward, I think as we talked about earlier, if we let something die, it's got to be because we chose to do it for a good reason.
Agreed.
And I'll just point out, Dean, that there's a much longer evaluation that UW had that gives a fuller explanation of their decision to shift away from the the K-5 programming.
So there was,
and it really was their decision, and I think that it was something where we were always kind of at a distance from that programming anyway. It was kind of between UW and the community centers, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't created a need that is now unfilled, and that shouldn't be on our radar. So that's kind of my take on it. And Jessica, you know more than I do, but,
Yeah.
all right, thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Thank
and
you.
thanks for the work on these.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Dean, second. Laura, your last vote this time, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Loud and clear.